You've got something important to say, and you want to say it well. But your audience is just as important as your subject. Do you really know your audience? We tend to think about ourselves a lot, and when we have a speech to prepare or a document to prepare, we also think about our message quite a bit. But who really are these people that are receiving your message? You know, the difference between an average communicator and a great communicator is often the ability to know your audience. Business professionals often do not analyze their audience like they should. They end up making assumptions about their audience that are wrong. I want to share the 3 most common myths that business professionals believe about their audience. If you spot them and avoid them, then you'll be on your way toward being a great communicator. Here they are. Myth number 1, your audience is just like you. This is the biggest myth of audience analysis, and we'll devote this lesson to this myth. In another lesson, we'll look at the 2 other myths. Myth number 2, the person that you address is the audience, and myth number 3, your audience has enough time for you. However, this lesson is devoted to the first myth. Your audience is just like you. Okay, here is your business communication target for this lesson. Adapt your message for an audience that may be very different from you. Here's a common workplace problem. People in the workplace use jargon that their audience does not understand. These professionals are classic examples of communicators who think that their audience is just like them. Now, it's very easy to say, of course, some people are different from me, I know that. But what often happens is that we fail to adapt our message to these differences. You know your work well, and that's why you are a business professional. In fact, if you don't know more about your product or service than your client does, then you're in trouble. But there's also an inherent pitfall in being an expert, knowing so much that it is difficult to communicate it to someone outside your field. The level of knowledge is just one area to consider. We might think of differences only on the basis of our audience's knowledge, but then fail to think about differences in their values. Or we think about differences in socioeconomic status, but fail to consider differences in other demographic factors such as age or gender, marital status, and so forth. Of course, not all demographic differences are relevant to every message, but too often we overlook the relevant factors and act as if the audience is just like us. Consider the needs and desires of your audience. A human resource director might send a memo or an email to everyone in the organization about changes to the organization's retirement plan. Well, who is most likely to be affected by this message? Probably the older workers. That director needs to consider that demographic while crafting the message. Another important factor is personality. The Myers-Briggs Type Indicator, a well-known personality test, identifies 8 functions that contribute to someone's personality. If you are presenting a proposal to someone who displays the thinking function strongly, use facts and logic rather than emotion to make your case. On the other hand, if you are presenting a proposal to someone who displays the feeling function strongly, demonstrate that your proposal satisfies not only the organization's bottom line, but also people's emotional needs. One of the most important factors to consider is your audience's attitude toward your message. Is your audience likely to be sympathetic to your message? Well, if you have good news, the answer is most likely yes. But it can be especially difficult speaking or writing to a hostile audience. You will often encounter an audience that is hostile toward your message if you deliver a persuasive message, and especially if you deliver a bad news message. Maybe you're in the position of having a hostile audience, even before that audience knows what your message is. If your audience is sympathetic, you can probably give the main point first. If you write a good newsletter, a letter, for example, explaining an error that results in your recipients receiving a refund, mention that refund in the very first sentence. If your audience is hostile to your message, a good strategy is to delay giving the main point. In a persuasive message, give your reasons first before overtly stating your proposition. In a bad news message, sandwich the bad news in the middle of your message so that you break the news gently. Perhaps you could start out by stating common ground or a compliment, and after giving the bad news, end your message with optimism about opportunities for the future. Knowledge level, values, demographic factors, attitudes, there are so many things to consider as you seek to learn about your audience. But one thing is for sure, your audience is not just like you. So make sure that you adapt your message to the realities of those differences. The result will be effective messages that mark you as an excellent communicator. Now be sure to watch my lesson on 2 other common myths about knowing your audience.